Hello and cześć. Welcome to the Warsaw Narrative, the first English language podcast about the history of Warsaw. This is a new channel, so if you find this interesting, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. There is a saying in Polish, pleść jak Piekarski na mękach, which means to talk nonsense like Piekarski under torture. This Piekarski was Michał Piekarski, and he was tortured because he tried to kill Zygmunt III Waza, the King of Poland. Today, we will take a look at who Michał Piekarski was, his motivation for wanting to kill the king, how Warsaw's first attempted regicide unfolded, and finally, the gruesome consequences for Michał Piekarski. Michał Piekarski was born in 1597 and came from a noble family that lived close to Sandomierz. As a child, he suffered a serious head injury, which most likely caused his mental problems that plagued him for the rest of his life. Today, it would be said that he had paranoid schizophrenia. Growing up, he was seen as a wealthy madman protected by his noble status and family. One time, while at Wawel Castle in Kraków, he flew into a rage and killed the royal chef and injured several servants. Piekarski was not punished due to the intervention of powerful individuals. However, Piekarski was placed under the guardianship of his family, which was approved by the king and included taking away his wealth and land. This triggered resentment and rage in Michał Piekarski. However, he did not direct his anger at his family, but at King Zygmunt III Waza. In Piekarski's mind, it was Zygmunt who was to blame for placing him under the guardianship of his family and for the loss of his wealth. The king became the source of all of Piekarski's misfortunes, and he believed that if he could get rid of the king, all his problems would be solved. In reality, King Zygmunt would not have looked at such matters personally, leaving it for his clerks. With his mind made up, 23-year-old Michał Piekarski arrived in Warsaw in early November 1620 and began preparing to assassinate the King of Poland. He prayed and fasted with murder on his mind. During his prayers, he said an angel appeared to him, urging him to kill the tyrant. Piekarski planned the assassination for November 15th. He knew that on that day, a Sunday, the king, along with his advisors, would be heading to St. John's Cathedral in Old Town. Piekarski was familiar with the customs of the royal court and knew the king would enter the church through the back entrance, as it was the closest way to the altar. On November 15th, 1620, around 9 in the morning, Piekarski went to St. John's Cathedral and hid in an alley close to the back entrance, waiting for the king. As a weapon, he carried a small warhammer, which was easy to use in a crowded space and had a deadly spike at one end. When Piekarski saw the king, he decided to strike. He came from the shadows and swung the warhammer down on the unsuspecting Zygmunt. However, fate was on the king's side. Before the warhammer could deliver the fatal blow, King Zygmunt turned his head, causing the weapon to injure his head and cheek before sliding off his clothing. The wounds were light and the king survived. The panic that erupted around Zygmunt prevented Piekarski from striking again. Several members of the king's retinue disarmed Piekarski when he tried to draw his saber, and he was forced to run. He didn't get very far as he was soon captured and thrown into prison. King Zygmunt actually pardoned Piekarski and requested his release. However, the senatorial and parliamentary court did not listen to the king. On November 27th, 1620, after a 2-week trial, Michał Piekarski was sentenced to death. Piekarski's execution was a series of public tortures designed to make him feel like he was slowly dying, and was meant as a warning to future assassins. The execution took place in Old Town in a place called Piekiełko, which means Little Hell. The statue of Jan Kiliński stands there today. The series of tortures inflicted on Piekarski that day were horrifying. Warning, this part gets a bit graphic. He was taken to the execution grounds on a horse-drawn cart, with a raised seat so everyone could see Piekarski arriving. A stage had been set up to make it very public. First, the executioner slowly tore off pieces of his flesh with a red-hot pincer. Next, the executioner placed Piekarski's right hand, the hand he tried to kill the king with, inside a blazing fire, making sure that Piekarski felt his flesh burning. After, both hands were cut off. Finally, they tied his hands and legs to 4 horses and tried to pull him apart. Unable to do so, the executioner used an axe to cut his arms and legs, and the horses eventually tore off his right leg. We can assume that Piekarski was dead by then, and whatever was left of his body was placed on a pyre and burned. The ashes were placed inside a cannon and fired, as it was believed this would erase all memory of Piekarski. His very public execution brought about the saying pleść jak Piekarski na mękach, to talk nonsense like Piekarski under torture, referring to his nonsensical words and screams in his final moments. To prevent any other similar attempts on the king's life, a passageway was built connecting the royal castle with St. John's Cathedral. This passage can be still seen today on Canonia Street in Old Town. Despite having his ashes fired from a cannon so he would be erased from memory, the story of Michał Piekarski lives on. I personally feel sorry for him. In the end, he was a mentally ill man who did not get the help he needed. Thank you for listening and take care.